fire in the hearth had long since burned down to a hush of embers, yet the widower still sat before it, hands clasped between his knees, eyes fixed not on the flicker of flame but on the past. The rocking chair beneath him creaked with each breath, a metronome to the quiet sorrow that filled the room. Outside, the wind slid across the plains in soft sighs, brushing against the wooden siding like a woman's fingers searching for warmth. The house, if it could still be called that, was a patchwork of time. Weathered beams, faded lace curtains, and the scent of dried herbs hung from a crooked rack. It was not a place of laughter, not any more. It had been 3 winters since his wife passed, and the grief had settled in like dust in the corners, easily ignored at first, then part of everything. He'd stopped speaking to most folks. The land was quiet, the cattle were few, and the market runs more necessity than social ritual. Solitude didn't frighten him. It felt earned, deserved even, like penance paid in silence. But it was not always like this. Once, this place had been warm with stories and pies cooling on the sill. There had been a child here, too, a boy with straw-blonde hair and boots too big for his feet. Fever took him, swift and merciless, the way prairie illnesses often do. After that, the widower simply went on existing, waking because there was no reason not to. It was on such a day, gray and wind-chilled, that something shifted. He was returning from chopping wood, arms full, face windburned, when he saw movement on the ridge. Not deer. Not fox. A figure, stumbling down the path that cut between the hills like a vein across flesh. His first instinct was wariness. Strangers didn't wander out here unless they were lost or dangerous. But as the figure drew closer, more detail rose into view. A woman, thin as winter's shadow, shoulders hunched beneath a threadbare shawl. In her arms, a bundle. No, 2 children, perhaps 4 or 5, tucked like roots beneath her coat. She walked like someone with no right to hope, only the habit of it. He didn't move from the porch, didn't call out, just watched. Her steps were uneven. She swayed once, then again. Then she sank, slow as dusk, down to her knees in the dirt. The twins slipped from her arms, landing with soft thuds on the dry grass. The wind picked up, as if to hurry the moment along. He dropped the wood. By the time he reached her, her eyes were fluttering closed. Her lips were cracked, skin ghost-pale, breath shallow. The boy and girl, curled beside her, stared up at him with quiet, unblinking fear. He didn't speak. Words felt foreign now. Instead, he knelt, scooped up the children first, light as scarecrows, and then their mother. Her body was cold. Too cold. She made a sound, a half-groan that might have been his name if she'd known it. Inside, the house changed. He set them before the fire, wrapped the children in wool blankets and tucked them into his son's old bed. It smelled of cedar and thyme. They said nothing, just watched him with those hollow eyes, their silence louder than any scream. He laid her on the couch, removed her wet boots, peeled back layers of worn fabric until she looked less like a beggar and more like a person again. Her ankles were bruised, one foot swollen. He found clean water, bathed her face, left the rest untouched. She woke hours later to the scent of stew. Not much, just rabbit and root vegetables, but warm, real. Her eyes opened slowly, like shutters loosened after a storm. He was sitting across the room, the rocking chair creaking, watching. She tried to speak, coughed instead. He stood and crossed to her, offering a chipped enamel cup. She drank. Her hands trembled. "They yours?" he asked softly, nodding toward the bedroom. She nodded. "Long road." Another nod. "Name?" "Clara," she rasped. "They're Ben and Elsie." He waited. "My husband died." "Nevada," she added, voice scraping. "Mine collapsed. Took everything. No one'd hire me." We walked. He didn't ask why she chose this direction. Sometimes folks don't choose. They just go. That night, he sat by the fire as the children slept and Clara lay with her arm over her eyes, the flicker of flame playing across her gaunt face. He watched the way her breath had steadied, the way her shoulders no longer curled in on themselves like leaves bracing for frost. He wasn't a man used to change. But something in the room was different. Not just the presence of others. Something quieter. A shift in air pressure. A soft sound, like the click of a door unlocking somewhere in the soul. He told himself they'd stay just a day or two. Enough to eat, to rest, to find their next path. It would be the decent thing. Nothing more. The next morning, he found Ben and Elsie in the kitchen, trying to stack wood in the stove with tiny hands. Clara stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but soft with something close to gratitude. "I can cook," she said, voice steadier. If that's all right." He nodded. The house, once quiet like a grave, now hummed faintly. He could hear the children's footsteps down the hall. Hear Clara humming a low tune, half remembered, as she stirred the pot. He ate in silence that evening, but the silence had changed. It felt shared now, not imposed. Like two people sitting at the edge of a stream, not speaking because the water said enough. When the sun dipped, he walked out to the porch and looked at the horizon. Clouds swirled there, heavy with promise. He knew the road she'd come down. Knew the endless dust and ache it held. He also knew, though he wouldn't admit it, that something had been returned to him. Not joy. Not yet. But a sound. A spark. Like the flint snap before fire. Behind him, Clara moved quietly about the room, tucking in blankets, soothing small dreams. He listened. Let the sound wash over him like a balm he hadn't known he needed. There was still grief in him. Still silence in the corners. But now not only silence. In the days that followed, the wind softened. It still moaned across the prairie at night, but its voice seemed less mournful, like it, too, had sensed the shift within the house on the hill. Life, quiet and raw, had crept in through the cracks, not with fanfare, but with a breath. The widower rose early, as he always had, habit stitched into his bones like thread through worn denim. But now, as he stepped into the kitchen, he was met not by silence, but by the low clatter of a spoon against a tin pot. Clara stood barefoot before the stove, one of his old shirts tied around her waist. The twins were still asleep, curled up like kittens beneath patched quilts in the bedroom that once held his son's laughter. "I found onions in the cellar," she said, not looking up. He offered a small nod, took his seat at the corner table. Her voice didn't yet carry warmth, but it held purpose, and that, somehow, filled the room with something close to comfort. The stew she served was plain but hot, and the way she placed the bowl before him, hands steady, eyes unreadable, felt like an offering. Not of food, but of dignity. He noticed then how she carried herself with a kind of quiet stubbornness, the kind born not from pride but survival. She'd known hunger, and worse. He hadn't asked her to work. Hadn't expected it. But every morning, Clara moved through the house with intent. She swept the worn floorboards, scrubbed the wash basin, mended fraying curtains with thread she found in a rusted tin beneath the bed. Not once did she ask where things were or whether she could. She moved through his world as though she'd once belonged in it and had merely returned. The twins were less guarded by the second day. Ben, the boy, shadowed the widower like a pup, watching as he split kindling, mimicking the angle of his stance. Elsie preferred to stay by Clara's side, but she sang now, soft humming that lilted through the house like a breeze through wheat stalks. On the third morning, Clara brought in the laundry from the line herself. Her limp was less pronounced, though the bruising still painted her ankles like spilled ink. She said little unless spoken to, but her silences had begun to feel different. Not evasive, simply cautious. The kind of quiet you keep when the world has taught you that even kindness can sour without warning. That afternoon, as the widower tended the fence line, he found Ben trailing behind him with a length of twine and a stick. The boy didn't speak, just mirrored his steps. "You ever seen a jackrabbit?" the widower asked. Ben shook his head. "Well," he said, crouching low, "you make a snare like this here, and you might." The boy watched, eyes wide, nodding solemnly as though absorbing sacred scripture. When he finally smiled, small and tooth-gapped, it was like watching a window creak open in a long-abandoned house. That night, as he stepped onto the porch, he found Clara sitting in his old rocker, shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The stars had come out, scattered and bright, the kind of sky that made a man remember just how small he truly was. "They laugh in their sleep," she said without turning. "The children. It's been a long time since they did that." He leaned against the post beside her, arms folded. "It's a good house," she added after a while. "Worn, but good." He almost told her about the day he built it. About how he and his wife had stood in a clearing, hands calloused, dreams big, and carved their life into the dirt. But the words stuck. Instead he said, "Thank you. For the stew." She smiled then. Just barely. But it changed her face, warmed the hollowed parts. It was the first time he saw her not as a burden carried in from the cold, but as something else, something bright that hadn't yet realized it could shine again. Over the next week, the rhythms of the house changed. Clara rose with the sun. The children began to help without being told. Meals were no longer solitary acts but small gatherings, full of clinking spoons and shy glances. The widower still kept to his chores, but he caught himself listening for the sound of her laughter, rare and fleeting, but real. One morning, after bringing in a fresh haul of kindling, he found a loaf of bread cooling on the windowsill. Its scent filled the room, thick with memory. He hadn't smelled fresh bread in years. Not since. He didn't finish the thought. Clara stood at the table, dusting flour from her hands. She looked at him then, truly looked, as if trying to understand the man behind the silence. And for a heartbeat, neither one of them said a word. "I hope it's all right," she said quietly. "I used the last of the yeast." He nodded once, then sat. Tore a piece off with rough fingers. It was warm. Real. And it broke something open inside him he didn't know was still locked. Later that day the rain came. A soft, steady patter that turned the earth dark and rich. The children pressed their noses to the window, watching rivulets trace down the glass. Clara moved through the house lighting oil lamps, their glow turning the rooms golden. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the storm felt far away. That evening, by lamplight, Clara sewed a new hem into Ben's coat. The widower sat at the corner of the room, whittling a piece of pine into something shapeless. The rhythm of knife on wood was calming. The children lay nearby, curled on the rug, half asleep. He caught her watching him. Not with suspicion, but something else. Something softer. "You live here alone long?" she asked, needle paused mid-stitch. He nodded. "Few years now. You ever think about leaving?" He shook his head slowly. "Where would I go?" She didn't answer. But he saw something flicker in her expression, a kinship, perhaps, a recognition of the way people stopped moving not because they found peace, but because they were too tired to keep running. On the 10th day, he saddled the mule and rode into town. The general store smelled the same, dust, rope, and licorice. He bought flour, more yeast, a bolt of calico cloth, and a small bag of sugar. When the shopkeeper asked if he'd taken up baking, the widower only grunted and counted his coins. He returned home to find the children playing in the yard, sticks in hand, chasing a rabbit that had made the mistake of getting too close. Clara was at the clothesline, sleeves rolled, hair pinned in a loose twist that the wind tugged at playfully. She turned when she saw him, one hand shading her eyes. He handed her the parcel, tried not to seem eager. "For your bread," he muttered. She blinked, unwrapped the cloth to see the sugar, the flour, the fabric. A pause. "I don't know what to say," she said. He looked at her. "Steady. Quiet. Just stay," he said. "Till you're ready." Clara looked down at the bundle, then toward the children, now laughing in the dirt. "All right," she said. "A while longer, then." That night, the house held a new sound, Elsie's giggles echoing from the washroom, Ben's proud announcement of having caught his first rabbit, with help, Clara's soft voice humming as she folded the calico and tucked it into the drawer beside the sink. The widower stepped out onto the porch again, the stars his only witness. He breathed deep. The air smelled of rain, of bread, of children's laughter and the faintest trace of lavender from Clara's hair. He didn't know what this was yet. Whether it would last. Whether it was meant to. But he knew, for the first time in a long while, that the house felt full again. And when he returned inside, when Clara glanced up at him from the rocker with something quiet and grateful in her eyes, he realized. He wasn't alone anymore. Not really. Not anymore. The days folded into one another like pages in a worn book, soft-edged and sun-creased. Autumn spilled across the prairie in rust and gold, crisping the leaves, curling the grasses, painting the sky with fire come dusk. The widower's land, once quiet and shrouded in grief, now rustled with life. The children's laughter wove through the rafters. Clara's voice hummed from the kitchen, sometimes low and sweet like a lullaby, other times lost in her own rhythm, filling the silence like a fire in the hearth. Ben fashioned a kite from rags and twine, and the widower helped him string it up, showing him how to wait for the right wind, how not all gusts are meant to be caught, some only meant to be felt. Elsie braided wildflowers into Clara's hair, while the widower watched from the porch, the ache in his chest a strange kind, gentler now, like longing turned tender. Still, there were shadows that no light could banish entirely. They didn't speak of Clara's past. He never asked about the man whose fists had marked her ankles, nor the hunger that had hollowed her cheeks. She didn't speak of his wife, though she'd once found a framed tintype of a young woman smiling in the orchard, tucked into the drawer beneath a yellowed handkerchief. Neither name passed their lips, yet their ghosts lingered in quiet corners, not unwelcome, just part of the house's breath. One morning, Clara stood at the stove, flipping johnny cakes, when the widower reached for the coffee tin and brushed her fingers by mistake. It was nothing, a touch, a heartbeat, but her eyes caught his, and in that pause something passed between them. Not passion, not desire. Something slower, like two people remembering what it was to be seen. "I'll take the children to the creek today," she said softly. "Let them catch crayfish." He nodded, though part of him wanted to go too. By afternoon, he found himself repairing the fence posts along the southern edge, but his hands moved without thought. His mind wandered, to the creek, to Clara lifting her skirts to wade through shallows, to Elsie's shrill laughter, to Ben's muddy palms. He saw it as though he were there, and the thought surprised him. For so long, he'd kept his memories locked tight as though joy, once lost, could never be reclaimed. When they returned near sunset, Clara carried a bucket of wriggling crayfish, and the children wore crowns of cattail fluff and muddy grins. She smiled at the widower, not shyly, but with quiet confidence, like someone slowly learning their worth. That night, after the children were tucked in, Clara stepped outside with a shawl and sat on the porch's edge. He followed, boots scuffing the wood. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For the way you let us be here. Not just in the house, but in your life." The fireflies blinked in the distance. Crickets sang like old violins. "I didn't expect it," she added. "Any of it. I thought we'd be gone by now." He looked at her. "You still planning to?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she said, eyes forward. "Sometimes I think we've already stayed too long. That I'm asking too much." "You're not asking anything," he said. "And you've given more than you know." He meant it. The house had changed. He had changed. Where there had once been only dust and silence, there was now color, sound, warmth. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was living. Winter crept close. Frost kissed the windows at dawn, and Clara knitted scarves from leftover yarn she found in the attic chest. The widower carved a rocking horse for Elsie, and when she saw it, she wept, the kind of tears that bloom from sudden joy, when a child remembers what it is to be cherished. They began reading aloud by lamplight, Clara's voice lilting through stories of rivers and brave girls and faraway lands. The children leaned into her sides, safe beneath her arms, while the widower sat close enough to hear her breath, close enough to feel the room shrink down to only them. But not all stillness is peace. One morning, Clara's hands trembled as she kneaded bread. Her face was pale, her gaze distant. He watched her from the doorway, something tight forming in his gut. "You all right?" She didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "It's the time of year." "What time?" She wiped her hands on a cloth. Didn't meet his eyes. 3 years ago, around this same frost. That was when I first ran. Left everything behind. She didn't need to say more. He understood. The body remembers the seasons, especially when they hurt. Some ghosts weren't people but moments that lingered in the marrow. He stepped forward, slow. "You're not running now." "No," she said, voice cracking. "But I don't know how to stay." The silence stretched long between them. "You don't have to know," he said gently. "Just keep waking up here." Her lips quivered. She nodded. And then, in a voice smaller than he'd ever heard from her, "Will you help me if I forget how?" He reached out, rested his hand over hers, rough over soft, not possession, just presence. "Every time," he said. It was the closest they'd come to anything resembling love. Not in words, not yet, but in the steady pulse of two hearts learning to beat beside one another again. That evening, the wind rose sharp and sudden. The twins huddled in their blankets, uneasy with the noise. Clara lit every lamp. The widower boarded the window that creaked. Storms like this came without warning this far west. Feral things born of open skies and cold ground. But inside the house, they were safe. He watched Clara move through the rooms, comforting the children, checking the latch, tucking quilts beneath doors. She was no stranger to chaos, but this time she faced it not with fear, but with the fierce grace of someone protecting her own. As night wore on, the wind screamed louder, rattling the walls. The widower stepped into the kitchen, found Clara standing by the stove, arms crossed. "You all right?" he asked. She turned, smiled faintly. "I think I am." He nodded. Lit the second lantern. Poured her tea. They sat together in the golden hush, the storm outside forgotten for a while. "You ever think about tomorrow?" she asked. He looked down at the cup in his hand. "Sometimes. Used to think I didn't have one. Now, I wonder what it might look like." She was quiet a moment. "I wonder if it could look like this," she said. And there it was. The moment neither had dared name. She wasn't asking for promises. Wasn't reaching for declarations. But she was, for the first time, letting herself hope. The wind howled once more, and somewhere upstairs, Ben stirred in his sleep. The widower set down his cup. Stood. Walked to the window. "Storm's near past," he said. She joined him. Together, they looked out at the swirling dark. "I'm scared," she whispered. He didn't ask of what. He didn't need to. "I am too," he said. She reached for his hand then, fingers cool but sure. And there, with the storm curling around the eaves and the fire flickering in the hearth, the house no longer felt haunted by the past. It felt like something else entirely. Like a beginning. And though neither of them said it, both knew. Spring might still be far off. But there was autumn now, rich and real and warm. Inside the heart. Winter came not in a single night, but slowly, first as mist, then as frost, and at last as a deep hush that blanketed the land like a woolen shroud. Snow crept in beneath the fence rails, carved soft drifts along the porch, and silenced the prairie grass beneath its white hush. The house grew quieter too, as if it were holding its breath through the long dark. Inside, time moved differently. Days were measured by the rise and fall of the fire, the scent of warm stew, the scratch of the twins' pencils as Clara taught them letters at the kitchen table. The widower repaired broken boots, oiled hinges, and found new rhythms in old silences. Each evening brought them all a little closer, drawn like moths to the same flame. They didn't speak of the spring. Not yet. But they moved like people who believed it might come. One morning in late January, the sky was so white it seemed to vanish into the earth. Clara stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched Ben and Elsie build a crooked snowman. The twins had taken to calling the widower Papa in the quiet way that children do, without announcement, just truthfully. The first time, Clara froze where she stood, her fingers clenched around a bowl. She hadn't corrected them. Nor had he. It just fit. She hadn't known how much of herself had been held back until she heard it spoken aloud. Later that evening, as she helped the widower shovel snow from the barn path, she glanced over and said, "I've been thinking." He leaned on the spade, waiting. "I'm not sure I know how to dream anymore," she said. "Not like other people. Not in pictures. I just feel peace sometimes. I think maybe that's enough." He took a moment before answering. "Then, maybe peace is what dreams turn into when they grow old enough." She looked at him, and for once, didn't look away. "But part of me's still scared I'll lose it." He stepped closer, brushing snow from her shawl. "You won't." She wanted to believe him. But belief, she'd learned, was a muscle, one that needed time and trust to rebuild. That trust would be tested soon enough. It happened in the middle of February, when the snow still stood knee-deep and the ice on the creek cracked like gunshots at dawn. A knock came to the door, sharp, foreign, a sound that didn't belong to this house of slow mornings and whispered laughter. The widower answered. A man stood on the porch, bundled in a traveler's coat, hat low over his eyes, a revolver slung loose at his side. His horse snorted steam behind him. The widower's voice was steady. "Can I help you?" The man lifted his gaze. His eyes were coal-black, hollow. "I'm looking for a woman and 2 kids," he said. "She's mine." Clara's breath caught behind the kitchen wall. She knew that voice. The man's name was never spoken, but it hung in the air like smoke. The past had come back, with boots and metal and fire in its gut. The widower stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Clara gathered the children in her arms. They knew something was wrong. They didn't cry, they just held on to her, as if they, too, remembered another winter when men with anger in their eyes came knocking. Outside, the conversation was low, graveled. The widower said little. The stranger spoke more, accusations, threats, a promise to return. And then he rode off. When the widower came back inside, he looked at Clara like she was something precious and breakable. "He's gone for now," he said. Clara's voice shook. "He won't stay gone." "No." The room was still, save for the crackle of the fire and the wind groaning at the eaves. "I should leave," she whispered. "Take the children and go before. You're not running again." She looked up, startled by the quiet force in his voice. "This is your home now," he said. "Ours. If he comes back, he'll answer to me." She didn't cry then. Not yet. But something inside her cracked open, some dam built from years of fear and solitude. That night, after the children slept, Clara sat by the window while the widower carved a piece of cedar into a smooth, delicate spoon. "I was 16 when I ran the first time," she said softly. "Thought I could change him. Thought I could fix someone by loving them harder." He set the carving down. "I buried who I was to survive him. And when I finally ran for good, I was just skin and breath. Nothing left of me." He moved beside her then, not to touch, not to press, but to be near. "You found yourself again," he said. "Right here. I didn't think I would. But you never asked me to prove anything. You just let me be." "You let me be too," he said. For the first time, she reached for his hand. It was the simplest gesture. But it changed everything. The days that followed were tense, but not without beauty. They waited, not in fear, but in readiness. The stranger might return, but so would the spring. And between those two truths, they built something stronger than hope, commitment. They made repairs, reinforced doors, stockpiled wood. The children were taught not only how to read, but how to be brave. The stranger returned at dusk one Sunday, while the sun was caught between the snow and the sky, bleeding copper across the horizon. He rode in fast and full of noise. But the widower was waiting on the porch, rifle across his lap. Clara stood in the doorway. Not hidden. Not trembling. "You don't belong here," the widower said. "She's mine," the stranger spat. "No. She's not." There was a pause, long enough for a heartbeat to break. Then, the stranger reached for his weapon. The widower didn't flinch. But he didn't fire either. Because Clara stepped past him. And for the first time in her life, she didn't cower. "She's gone," she said, her voice clear, strong. "The woman you broke. She's not here anymore." The stranger's mouth curled into something ugly. "You think this is over?" "I know it is." He didn't shoot. Neither did the widower. Perhaps it was the look in Clara's eyes, calm, final. Perhaps it was the stillness of the air, or the quiet courage of two children watching from the loft window above. Whatever it was, the man turned his horse and left. This time, for good. Clara stood outside long after he'd vanished into the snow. The widower came beside her. The wind had died. The sky was silver. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I think I am," she said. Then paused. "No, I know I am." The next morning, the thaw began. A slow drip from the eaves. Birdsong. The snow pulling back like a curtain from the earth. Ben found the first green shoot near the well. Elsie gathered it like a treasure and pressed it into Clara's palm. And when Clara looked at the widower that day, her eyes held no fear. Only warmth. Only love. They stood together in the field, the children chasing sunbeams nearby. The house behind them breathed like something living. He took her hand. She didn't flinch. They didn't need vows. They'd already made them, in every shared silence, in every healed wound, in every small kindness that had passed between them through the long, cold months. Winter had ended. And with it, so had the loneliness. If you've ever wondered whether a broken soul can bloom again, it can. All it needs is time. And the gentlest kind of love. The kind that doesn't rush the spring, but waits for it, one sunrise at a time.